November 1443. The Battle of Niš. The Ottoman army is breaking apart. Christian forces under John Hunyadi are tearing through the center. Soldiers are dying by the thousands. Horses scream. Steel clashes against steel. Smoke chokes the valley. And in the middle of this chaos, one of the Sultan's most trusted commanders makes a decision that will haunt the Ottoman Empire for the next 25 years. He doesn't reinforce the line. He doesn't rally the retreat. Instead, he hunts. He moves through the chaos like a predator, ignoring the battle, ignoring his duties, searching for one specific man. He finds him in a tent at the edge of camp, the Sultan's head secretary, the man who carries the imperial seals, the man who writes the decrees that move armies and topple kingdoms. The secretary is panicking, shoving documents into bags, preparing to flee. He doesn't see the blade until it's at his throat. "Write," the commander says. "Write what, bey?" "A firman, commanding the governor of Krujë to surrender the fortress to me. Immediately." The secretary's hands tremble. He knows what this means. This is treason. This is death. But the blade presses harder. He writes. He stamps the Sultan's seal into hot wax. And then the commander kills him, takes the forged decree, gathers 300 Albanian cavalrymen who had served under him, and rides west, toward the mountains, toward a homeland he hasn't seen in nearly 3 decades, toward a fortress that belongs to the Sultan. A fortress he's about to steal. His name was Gjurgj Kastrioti. The Ottomans called him Skanderbeg. For 28 years they had shaped him into their perfect weapon. In one night that weapon turned against them. What followed was 25 years of humiliation. The Ottomans sent their greatest generals. They sent army after army. They eventually sent the conqueror of Constantinople himself. None of them could break him. This is the story of the greatest betrayal in Ottoman history, and the revenge that came after. But here's what you need to understand first. Skanderbeg didn't grow up dreaming of rebellion. He grew up inside the Ottoman machine, and he was sent there by his own father. His father was John Kastrioti, a minor Albanian lord who ruled a mountainous territory near the Adriatic coast. For years John played a dangerous game. He resisted Ottoman expansion when he could. He submitted when he had to. By 1415 he had no choice. The Sultan demanded loyalty. And loyalty in the Ottoman world meant one thing. Hostages. John was forced to send his sons to the Sultan's court. Not as prisoners in chains. As guests. Political insurance. Guarantees that their father would never rebel. Gjurgj was one of those sons. He was around 9 years old. He didn't arrive in rags. He arrived as a nobleman's child. He was educated in the palace. Trained in languages, warfare, and diplomacy. Given opportunities most Albanian boys would never see. But make no mistake, he was a hostage. His life depended on his father's obedience. If John rebelled, his sons would die. The Sultan made sure everyone understood that. The Ottomans didn't waste talent. Gjurgj was smart, athletic, quick to learn. They saw potential in him. So they invested. He was converted to Islam. Given a new name. Skanderbeg, Lord Alexander. A reference to Alexander the Great. The name shortened over time. Skanderbeg. He mastered Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Italian, and Serbian. He studied military tactics under the empire's finest commanders. He learned the Ottoman way of war, lightning cavalry strikes, psychological terror, logistics that could move armies across continents. By his 20s he was leading soldiers into battle. By his 30s he was one of the Sultan's most valuable commanders. He fought in campaigns across Serbia and Macedonia. He crushed rebellions. He expanded the empire's reach. The Sultan rewarded him. Medals, land grants, a seat among the elite. And Skanderbeg played the part perfectly. He dressed like an Ottoman lord, spoke like one, thought like one. At least that's what everyone believed. Here's the question no one could answer. What was happening inside his head? 28 years is a long time. Long enough to forget where you came from. Long enough to become the thing you were made into. Most hostages did exactly that. They assimilated. They became loyal Ottomans. They forgot their fathers, forgot their homelands, forgot their original names. Skanderbeg didn't forget. We don't know exactly when the mask started to crack. There's no diary, no confession, just the evidence of what he did. But something was building. Maybe it was news from home. His father John died in 1437. His brothers died too, some in Ottoman service, others under mysterious circumstances. The family lands were being absorbed by the empire. Maybe it was the endless campaigns, fighting for a sultan who saw him as a tool, winning victories that meant nothing to him. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just remembered who he was. The boy from the mountains, the son of John Castriati, the Albanian who had been playing Ottoman for 3 decades. Whatever the reason, by 1443 he was ready. He just needed an opportunity. November 1443. The Ottoman Empire is at war. A Christian coalition led by John Hunyadi, the Hungarian general, has launched a major offensive. The Ottomans march to meet them near Niš. This is a significant battle. Tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides. The fate of the Balkans hangs in the balance. Skanderbeg is there, commanding a cavalry contingent, expected to do what he always does: fight, win, and return with glory. But something goes wrong for the Ottomans. Hunyadi's forces hit harder than expected. The Ottoman center buckles. Confusion spreads. The retreat begins. And Skanderbeg sees his chance. Chaos is opportunity. When everyone is running, no one is watching. This is the moment he has been waiting for. He doesn't flee with the army. He moves with purpose. Through the smoke. Through the dying. Toward the administrative tents at the camp's edge. The Sultan's head secretary is exactly where Skanderbeg expects him to be. Panicking. Gathering documents. Preparing to run. He never hears Skanderbeg enter. The blade is at his throat before he can react. "You're going to write exactly what I tell you," Skanderbeg says. The secretary recognizes him. Everyone recognizes Skanderbeg. He's famous, decorated, trusted, which makes this even more terrifying. What do you want, Bey?" "A firman, in the Sultan's name, commanding the governor of Krujë to surrender the fortress and garrison to me. Immediately. Without question." The secretary understands. This is treason. High treason. The kind that ends with heads on spikes. But the blade doesn't waver. So he writes. His hand shakes. The ink smears slightly. But he writes every word Skanderbeg dictates. When he finishes, Skanderbeg watches him heat the wax. Watches him press the Sultan's official seal into it. The document is now real. An imperial command. Unquestionable authority. Anyone who sees this firman will believe the Sultan himself ordered the transfer. The secretary looks up, hoping maybe this is enough. Hoping maybe he'll be spared. Skanderbeg draws the blade across his throat. No witnesses. The body is still warm when Skanderbeg steps out of the tent. 300 cavalrymen are waiting for him. Albanians. Men who had served under his command for years. Men who had been watching him. Wondering. He doesn't give a speech. "We're leaving," he says. "We're going home." That's it. Every single one of them follows. They ride west. Away from the battlefield. Away from the Ottoman army. Away from everything they had known. They ride through Ottoman territory for days. Past patrols that don't yet know what happened. Across rivers and through mountain passes. Skanderbeg carries the forged firman against his chest. A piece of parchment. A stolen seal. And a plan that depends entirely on one thing: the governor of Krujë not asking too many questions. Here's the problem. The firman is a forgery. A convincing one. But still a forgery. The governor of Krujë, a man named Hasan Bey, is loyal to the Sultan. He has no reason to hand over the fortress to anyone, especially not in the middle of a war. If he hesitates, if he sends a messenger to verify the order, if anyone looks too closely at the seal, Skanderbeg dies. His 300 men die, and the rebellion ends before it even begins. But there's a bigger problem. Even if the gamble works, even if Krujë falls, then what? Skanderbeg is one man, with one fortress, against an empire that stretches from the Danube to the Euphrates. Albania isn't a country. It's a patchwork of feuding clans. Lords who have spent generations killing each other over grazing rights and border disputes. Men who hate each other almost as much as they hate the Ottomans. Uniting them will be nearly impossible. And the Sultan will come. Not with one army. With everything. The defection was the easy part. Surviving what comes next. That's where the real story begins. If you believe one decision can change history, you need to see what happens next. Hit subscribe right now. Because Skanderbeg is about to walk into that fortress with nothing but a forged document and a lie. And somehow, against all logic, it's going to work. But that's just the beginning. What follows is 25 years of war, betrayal, impossible victories, and a rivalry with the most powerful man on earth. The wolf is coming home. Skanderbeg had the keys to his freedom in his pocket. But freedom isn't something you carry. It's something you take. Krujë sat on a rocky crag like an eagle's nest. Gray stone walls. Steep cliffs on three sides. A single winding path to the gates. For centuries, this fortress had controlled the mountain passes of central Albania. Now it belonged to the Ottomans. A garrison manned the walls. The green banners of the Sultan flew from the towers. The governor, Hasan Bey, administered the region in the Sultan's name. And Skanderbeg was riding straight toward it. He didn't come as a rebel. He came as the Sultan's favorite. He wore his Ottoman silk kaftan over his mail. He spoke refined Turkish. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had won a dozen campaigns for the empire. And in his saddlebag he carried the forged firmán. The greatest lie he would ever tell. The gates opened without resistance. Why wouldn't they? This was Skanderbeg, the legendary commander. The man the Sultan trusted with armies. He had documents. He had the imperial seal. He had 300 cavalry riding behind him. Hasan Bey came out to greet him personally. Skanderbeg, we did not expect you. Skanderbeg dismounted, smiled, played the role he had perfected for 28 years. The Sultan has new orders, he said. I am to take command of this fortress immediately. He handed over the firmán. Hasan Bey examined it. The seal looked authentic. The language was correct. The parchment was genuine Ottoman stock because it was stolen from the secretary's own supplies. There was no reason to doubt. Of course, Bey. The fortress is yours. He handed over the keys. And then, because he was a gracious host, he invited Skanderbeg to a feast. That evening, the great hall filled with Ottoman officers. They ate the Sultan's food, drank the Sultan's wine, toasted to the Sultan's health. Skanderbeg sat at the head of the table, laughing at jokes, telling war stories, playing the loyal commander one final time. Meanwhile, his 300 men were moving into position. The armory, the gates, the barracks, every critical point in the fortress. Silently, methodically, exactly as planned. The Ottoman officers noticed nothing. They were too busy celebrating with their famous guest. By midnight the trap was set. Skanderbeg stood up from the table. The room went quiet. He drew his sword. And then he spoke. Not in Turkish. Not in the language of the empire he had served for 3 decades. He spoke in Albanian. The moon has set. The eagle is awake. For a moment no one moved. The Ottoman officers stared at him, confused, trying to understand what was happening. Then the doors burst open. Skanderbeg's men poured in, swords drawn. No warning, no mercy. The slaughter was fast, surgical. By the time the sun rose, every Ottoman soldier in Krujë was dead or fled. The green banners came down. A new flag rose in their place. Red field, black double-headed eagle. The symbol of the Castriati family. The symbol of Albania. For the first time in decades, Krujë belonged to Albanians. The townspeople gathered in the square at dawn. They were confused, terrified. They had gone to sleep under Ottoman rule. They woke up to a revolution. And standing before them was a man most of them had never seen. A man who spoke their language with an accent. A man who looked Ottoman but claimed to be one of them. Skanderbeg addressed them directly. "I have not brought you liberty," he said. "I found it here, among you. It was never gone. It was waiting." Some believed him. Some didn't. But it didn't matter. The fortress was his. The garrison was dead. And the Sultan's flag was burning. Whatever came next, there was no going back. Skanderbeg had won the first move. But one fortress doesn't make a nation. Albania in 1443 was not a country. It was a patchwork. Dozens of lords controlling their own valleys, their own militias, their own grudges. The Thopia clan in the lowlands, the Muzaka in the south, the Dukajini in the north, the Arianidi near the coast. They had been fighting each other for generations. Blood feuds that stretched back centuries. Wars over grazing land, over water rights, over insults delivered at weddings 3 generations ago. The Ottomans exploited this constantly. They played the lords against each other, kept them weak, kept them divided. If Skanderbeg tried to fight alone, he would lose. The Sultan would crush Krujë in months. He needed an alliance, and that meant getting men who hated each other to sit in the same room. March 1444. 4 months after Krujë, Skanderbeg called the Albanian lords to the cathedral in Lezhë. It was a risk. Many of these men had collaborated with the Ottomans. Some had fought against the Castriati family. Several had active blood feuds with each other. Putting them in one room could end in massacre. But they came. Not because they trusted Skanderbeg. They came because they were afraid. They had all heard what happened at Krujë. They knew the Sultan would respond. And they knew that when the Ottoman army came, it wouldn't distinguish between rebels and collaborators. Everyone would burn. Fear makes strange alliances. The cathedral was tense. Lords who hadn't spoken in years sat across from each other. Men whose fathers had killed each other's fathers. Men who had spent their lives competing for the same scraps of land. Skanderbeg stood at the front. "Look at yourselves," he said. "Kings of your own hills. Masters of your own valleys. And what has it gotten you?" Silence. The Sultan doesn't see lords. He sees cattle. He taxes you when he needs money. He takes your sons when he needs soldiers. He burns your fields when you disobey. He pointed at one lord, then another. You think he respects your borders? Your treaties? Your neutrality? He let the question hang. He respects one thing, strength. And divided you have none. The debate lasted for days. Who would lead? Skanderbeg was the obvious choice, but some lords didn't trust him. He had spent decades as an Ottoman. How did they know he wouldn't betray them too? Who would pay for the army? The Albanian lords were not wealthy. The Ottomans had been draining them for years. Who would submit to whom? The Dukajini refused to take orders from the Thopia. The Muzaka refused to serve under anyone. Skanderbeg used every diplomatic skill the Ottomans had taught him. He flattered. He threatened. He promised. He played egos against each other until the mathematics worked. Finally they agreed. The lords signed a pact. They called it the League of Lezhë. It was the first time in history that the Albanian clans had formally united under a single command. Skanderbeg was named Captain General, commander of all allied forces. But he understood exactly what the title meant. It wasn't a crown. It was a target. When the Sultan came, and the Sultan would come, Skanderbeg would be the first one he tried to kill. The League was fragile. Held together by fear of the Ottomans, not love of each other. One major defeat and it would shatter. Skanderbeg had to win. And he had to keep winning. Or everything would collapse. This is the moment where everything changes. If you're learning something new, if this story is hitting different, drop a like right now. It sounds small, but it tells the algorithm to show this video to more people who need to hear it. Because what comes next is the part the Ottomans never saw coming. The Sultan is about to send his army. 25,000 soldiers. Orders to bring back Skanderbeg's head in a silk bag. And Skanderbeg is about to teach them what Albanian mountains do to invaders. Skanderbeg had his coalition. He had his fortress. He had his flag. But the Sultan had something else. 25,000 soldiers. And a personal grudge. Sultan Murad II did not take the news well. Skanderbeg wasn't just a rebel. He was an insult. This was a man the empire had raised. Educated. Trusted. A man who had eaten at the Sultan's table. Who had been given lands and titles and honor. And he had repaid all of it with treason. Murad wanted him dead. Not just defeated. Destroyed. Made into an example that would terrify anyone else who dreamed of rebellion. He summoned Ali Pasha, one of his most experienced commanders. Take 25,000 men. Go to Albania. Bring me Skanderbeg's head. In a silk bag. Ali Pasha gathered his forces. Cavalry. Infantry. Archers. Siege equipment. Everything needed to crush a small mountain rebellion. By summer 1444, the Ottoman army was marching west. Here's the math. Ali Pasha, 25,000 trained soldiers. Professional army. Experienced in conquest. Supplied by an empire. Skanderbeg 8,000 infantry. 7,000 cavalry. Poorly equipped. Barely unified. Fighting on a shoestring. By every measure that mattered, Skanderbeg was already dead. The Ottomans knew it. Ali Pasha knew it. The Albanian lords probably knew it too, though they tried not to show it. But Skanderbeg knew something they didn't. Numbers don't fight. Men do. And men fight differently in mountains than on open plains. He had spent decades learning Ottoman tactics. He understood how their army moved. How it thought. Where it was strong. And where it was weak. Skanderbeg chose his ground carefully. The valley of Torviol. A narrow passage through the mountains. High ridges on both sides. Dense forest covering the slopes. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Terrible terrain for a large army. He sent a small force ahead. Visible. Provocative. Just enough to make the Ottomans chase. Ali Pasha took the bait. His army marched into the valley. Banners flying. Drums thundering. Confident in their numbers. Expecting a standard battle. Two forces meeting in the open, the larger one grinding down the smaller. They didn't find a battle. They found silence. Skanderbeg had hidden 3,000 of his best cavalry on the forested ridges above the valley. He waited. He watched the Ottoman vanguard enter the bottleneck. Watched the center of their line stretch thin. Watched the rear guard fall behind. When the moment was perfect, he gave the signal. A single blast from a ram's horn. The mountainside erupted. 3,000 riders crashed into the Ottoman flanks. From above. From the trees. From angles the Ottomans hadn't thought to defend. The horses panicked. The narrow terrain made it impossible to maneuver. Ottoman cavalry crashed into their own infantry. Soldiers trampled each other trying to flee. What was supposed to be a battle became a slaughter. Ali Pasha fled. He left 8,000 dead in the mud. Abandoned weapons. Abandoned supplies. Abandoned pride. The survivors straggled back to Ottoman territory with stories of demons in the mountains. Of an enemy who appeared from nowhere and vanished like smoke. For the first time in nearly a century, the Ottoman war machine had been beaten by a smaller, poorer force. Europe was shocked. The Pope sent congratulations. Hungary sent praise. Venice reconsidered its neutrality. For a brief moment, the Christian world dared to hope that the Ottoman tide could be stopped. But Skanderbeg didn't celebrate. He knew the truth. Ali Pasha was just the first wave. The Sultan would send more. And more. Until one of them succeeded or the empire ran out of soldiers. The pattern repeated for the next decade. Every year, a new Ottoman army crossed the border. Every year, Skanderbeg bled them in the mountains. 1445. Another invasion. Another defeat. 1446. The Sultan sent a larger force. It failed too. 1448, 1450. 1452. The same result. But these weren't clean victories. They were survival. The Ottomans couldn't catch Skanderbeg. So they changed tactics. They stopped trying to fight him directly. Instead, they tried to starve him out. Ottoman armies stopped chasing Skanderbeg into the mountains. Instead, they burned everything in the valleys. Vineyards, grain fields, orchards, villages, anything that could feed an army or sustain a population. They took women and children as slaves, killed the livestock, salted the earth. If they couldn't catch the wolf, they would destroy the forest he hid in. The Albanian countryside became a wasteland. People fled to the high mountain caves, lived on dried goat meat and whatever they could forage, watched everything they had built turn to ash. The war was no longer about battles. It was about who could endure more suffering. Skanderbeg adapted. He couldn't match the Ottomans in open warfare, so he made sure there was never open warfare. He built a network of signal fires across the mountains. From Mount Tamor in the south to the walls of Krujë in the north, watchers could relay messages in minutes. An Ottoman patrol spotted. A supply convoy approaching. An army crossing the border. By the time the Ottomans reached their target, it was empty. The people had vanished. The supplies were hidden. Only ambushes waited. Skanderbeg's men lived in the saddle. They carried nothing but weapons, dried food, and hatred. They attacked at 3 a.m., burned supply wagons, killed sentries, vanished before the Janissaries could respond. Guerrilla warfare. Before anyone called it that. But the pressure was taking its toll. The Albanian lords had signed up for victory. Not for endless war. Not for watching their lands burn year after year. They started to whisper. How much longer can we do this? Our wealth is gone. Our people are starving. Maybe the Sultan's tribute isn't so bad. Maybe peace is better than this. Skanderbeg held them together through sheer force of will. Through victories that proved resistance was possible. Through fear of what the Ottomans would do if they surrendered. But the cracks were growing. And the Sultan knew it. 1455. 12 years into the war. Moisi Galami defected. This wasn't some minor lord switching sides. Moisi was Skanderbeg's right hand. His childhood friend. The man who knew every strategy. Every secret. Every weakness. He went to the Sultan and made a promise. I can do what your generals cannot. I can kill the wolf. Give me an army. The Sultan gave him 15,000 men. And sent him back to Albania. When Skanderbeg heard the news, he didn't rage. He went quiet. This was different from fighting Ottoman generals. Those were enemies. Strangers. Men he had never broken bread with. Moisi was family. The two armies met in the field. Skanderbeg saw his friend's banner across the clearing. Saw the men they had trained together now standing in Ottoman lines. The battle was brutal. A civil war inside a rebellion. Brother against brother. Albanian against Albanian. Men who had fought side by side now trying to kill each other. When it was over, Skanderbeg's forces broke the Ottoman line. Moisi fled back to Edirne. Defeated. Humiliated. But alive. 1 year later Moisi came back. Not with an army. Alone. He walked into Skanderbeg's camp. Unarmed. Ragged. A broken man. He threw his sword at Skanderbeg's feet. I have no right to ask for mercy, he said. I only ask for a quick death. The council erupted. The Albanian lords screamed for blood. They wanted Moisi's head on a spike. They wanted him made into an example. They wanted revenge for every man who had died because of his betrayal. Skanderbeg raised his hand. The room went silent. He looked at the man kneeling before him. The friend who had tried to destroy him. The brother who had chosen the Sultan. And then he reached down and pulled Moisi to his feet. If I kill my friends for being human, Skanderbeg said, I have already lost to the Sultan. No execution. No punishment. Moisi was forgiven. He would go on to fight for Skanderbeg again. To redeem himself in battle. To die as an Albanian instead of an Ottoman puppet. But that's not why this moment mattered. It mattered because of what it proved. Skanderbeg wasn't fighting for power. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He wasn't fighting to become the next tyrant. He was fighting for something else. Something the Ottomans didn't have a category for. A soul. This single act of mercy did more to unify the League than a dozen victories. It showed the Albanian lords that Skanderbeg was different. That following him meant something beyond survival. The man who had every right to kill chose not to. And that choice echoed. This is the kind of leadership you don't find in most history books. If this story is resonating with you, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. What would you have done in Skanderbeg's position? Would you have shown mercy? Or would you have made an example? I want to know. Moisey's betrayal hurt. But it was also a warning. Because the man who conquered Constantinople was watching. And he was already planning something far worse than sending generals. He was coming himself. For 2 decades, Skanderbeg had held the line. He had beaten back armies, survived betrayals, turned Albania into a graveyard for Ottoman ambition. But now a new player entered the game. Mehmed, the conqueror. The man who did the impossible, who broke the walls of Constantinople after 1,000 years. He didn't lose. And he was coming for the wolf. By 1466, the Ottoman throne had a new master. Mehmed. This was not his father. Murad had been cautious, patient, willing to negotiate when the cost of war grew too high. Mehmed was different. He was the man who conquered Constantinople, the city that had stood for over 1,000 years, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the prize that every Muslim commander had dreamed of taking since the Prophet's time. Mehmed took it in 53 days. He was 21 years old. Now he was in his 30s. Battle-hardened, ruthless, convinced that God had chosen him to unite the world under Ottoman rule. He had crushed Serbia, swallowed Bosnia, pushed into Greece, forced the Venetians to pay tribute. Every enemy who stood against him had fallen. Except one. That Albanian warlord in the mountains. The traitor who had been humiliating Ottoman armies for over 2 decades. Skanderbeg. Mehmed decided to finish it personally. The invasion of 1466 was unlike anything Albania had ever seen. 100,000 soldiers. Let that number sink in. The entire population of Albania at the time was maybe 200,000 people. Women, children, elderly, everyone. Mehmed brought an army equal to half the country's population. He brought the world's most advanced artillery. Bronze cannons that could shatter stone walls from a mile away. The same weapons that had broken Constantinople's legendary defenses. He brought engineers, siege specialists, supply lines stretching back hundreds of miles. This wasn't a punitive raid. This was annihilation. Mehmed wanted to erase Skanderbeg, erase his rebellion, erase any memory that resistance was possible. And to make sure the job was done right, he built something new. Before attacking Krujë, Mehmed constructed a fortress. Elbasan. Right in the heart of Albanian territory. This wasn't just a military outpost. It was a statement. I'm not leaving. I'm not retreating after one campaign. I'm building permanent infrastructure. I will squeeze the life out of this country until nothing remains. Elbasan would serve as a base, a staging ground, a stranglehold. Even if this campaign failed, the next one would launch from Albanian soil. And the one after that. And the one after that. Mehmed was thinking in decades. He could afford to. He had an empire. Skanderbeg had mountains and stubbornness. Summer 1466. The Ottoman army surrounded Krujë. From the walls, the defenders looked down at a sea of tents. Cooking fires stretched to the horizon. The sound of drums never stopped. The garrison commander was Tanush Thopia, a veteran, a believer. But even he must have felt the weight of what was coming. The cannons opened fire. Day after day, the bronze monsters roared. Stone walls that had stood for centuries began to crack. Dust filled the air. The ground shook with every impact. Inside the fortress, supplies dwindled. The wells started running low. The grain stores emptied. Men began eating leather. Then rats. Then things they didn't speak about. Weeks passed. Months. The walls kept crumbling. The defenders kept dying. And Mehmed waited. He had time. He had food. He had replacements for every soldier who fell. Krujë had none of those things. But Skanderbeg wasn't inside Krujë. He was outside, with 8,000 men, watching. He couldn't break the siege directly. 8,000 against 100,000 is suicide. Even in the mountains. Even with every tactical advantage. So he didn't try. Instead, he made the Ottoman army's life a nightmare. Every night, Albanian raiders hit the camp. They came from different directions, at different times. Never the same pattern twice. They burned supply wagons, killed sentries, poisoned water sources, stole horses, vanished before the Janissaries could respond. The Ottoman soldiers couldn't sleep. They heard hooves in the darkness, saw fires on the ridges, felt eyes watching them from the trees. Rumors spread through the camp. Skanderbeg was a demon, a jinn. He could appear anywhere, walk through walls, kill a man without making a sound. He wasn't supernatural. He was just better at this than anyone they had ever faced. Mehmed's army was massive. That was its strength. It was also its weakness. 100,000 men eat a lot of food. They drink a lot of water. They need fresh horses, fresh weapons, fresh everything. All of it had to come from somewhere. Skanderbeg targeted the supply lines. Grain convoys from Macedonia, ambushed. The wagons burned. The guards killed. The grain scattered in the mud. Replacement troops marching from the east, harassed every mile. Picked off by archers. Demoralized before they ever reached the siege. Water sources, poisoned. Dead animals thrown into streams. Wells filled with filth. The Ottoman army was starving in the middle of their own siege. Skanderbeg turned the invasion against itself. This was psychological warfare. The Ottoman soldiers had conquered half the known world. They had never felt hunted. They had never felt afraid. Now they did. Every rustle in the darkness could be death. Every shadow could hide an Albanian blade. Every meal could be their last. Discipline started to crack. Soldiers deserted. Officers argued. Morale collapsed. The mighty Ottoman army, the terror of Europe, was being eaten alive by 8,000 mountain fighters. And every day that passed without taking Krujë was another humiliation. The conqueror of Constantinople was not accustomed to failure. He had expected this to take weeks. It was taking months. His army was bleeding. His reputation was suffering. And that fortress, that ugly gray rock in the mountains, still flew the eagle banner. Eventually Mehmed made a decision. He couldn't stay forever. The empire had other fronts, other enemies, other demands. He would leave the siege to his general, Balkan Pasha, a trusted commander, a man who had proven himself in a dozen campaigns. Finish this, Mehmed ordered. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how many men you lose. Take that fortress. Kill everyone inside. And bring me Skanderbeg's head. Then the Sultan rode away. He never looked back. Balkan Pasha tightened the noose. The attacks on the supply lines had hurt. But the siege was still intact. The walls were still crumbling. The defenders were still starving. Time was on the Ottoman side. All Balkan had to do was wait. Let hunger do the killing. Let disease thin the garrison. Let despair break their will. Inside Krujë, the situation was desperate. Tanush Thopia held his men together through sheer determination. They prayed. They rationed. They watched the walls crumble around them. Some wanted to surrender. Negotiate. Maybe Mehmed would show mercy. Tanush refused. There is no mercy, he told them. There is only the eagle or the grave. They kept fighting. The siege had lasted months. The garrison was at breaking point. A few more weeks and Krujë would fall. Everyone knew it. Then Tanush made a decision. One final attack. A desperate sally from the gates. Hit the Ottoman camp while they least expected it. Kill as many as possible. Maybe, just maybe, 'cause enough chaos to break the siege. It was almost certainly suicide. They did it anyway. The gates opened at dawn. The remaining defenders poured out. Screaming. Charging. throwing everything they had at the Ottoman lines. The fighting was savage. Close quarters. Blade to blade. And somewhere in that chaos Balaban Pasha fell. The details are unclear. Maybe an Albanian sword. Maybe an arrow. Maybe a stray blow in the confusion. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the Ottoman general, the man Mem trusted to finish the job, died in the mud outside the walls he was supposed to conquer. An army without a leader is a mob. The Ottoman forces panicked. No one knew who was in command. No one knew what orders to follow. The siege, months of grinding, starving, dying, fell apart in hours. The Ottomans retreated. Krujë still stood. The eagle banner still flew. For the 23rd year in a row, the Ottoman Empire had failed to crush Skanderbeg. But don't mistake survival for victory. Skanderbeg didn't win. He endured. And the cost was everything. Albania was a wasteland. The fields were ash. The villages were ruins. The population was decimated. A generation of young men had died in the mountains. Families had been torn apart. Children had grown up knowing nothing but war. Skanderbeg was 61 years old. He had spent a quarter of a century fighting. His body was breaking down. The sword that had killed thousands was getting heavy. The Sultan would send another army. He always did. And Skanderbeg was running out of everything. Time, men, strength. The wolf had held the line. But even wolves get old. Mehmed was already planning the next invasion. Larger, better supplied. Designed to succeed where all others had failed. The only question was whether Skanderbeg would live to see it. The siege was lifted. The Sultan had retreated. But Skanderbeg wasn't celebrating. He knew what no one else wanted to admit. He had won every battle. And he was still losing the war. Time was the one enemy he couldn't defeat. By 1467, Albania was a corpse. Not a country. A skeleton. The fields that once fed villages were black. Burned so many times nothing would grow. The vineyards were gone. The Orkding orchards were stumps. The population had been cut in half. Dead in battle. Dead from starvation. Carried off as slaves. The lords who had signed the League of Leisure were exhausted. Their treasuries were empty. Their armies were ghosts. 24 years of war had drained everything. And Skanderbeg, the man who had held it all together, was dying. He was 62 years old. In the 15th century, that was ancient. Most men didn't see 50. Soldiers rarely saw 40. Skanderbeg had spent more than half his life in the saddle. Fighting. Bleeding. Watching friends die. His body was a map of scars. Old wounds that never healed properly. Joints that ached in the cold. A cough that wouldn't go away. The fire was still there. The mind was still sharp. But the flesh was failing. He knew it. The lords knew it. Even the Ottomans probably knew it. The wolf's time was running out. January 1468. Skanderbeg traveled to Luzja. A meeting of the League. One more council. One more attempt to plan for the war that would never end. He didn't make it. Somewhere on that journey, his body finally surrendered. The fever took hold. The strength that had carried him through 25 years of war collapsed. They brought him to a house in Luzja. Put him in a bed. The Albanian lords gathered around him. They didn't know what to do. For a generation, Skanderbeg had been the answer to every problem. The solution to every crisis. The one man who could hold the fractured clans together. Now he was lying in a bed. Pale. Weak. Barely able to speak. And there was nothing anyone could do. Skanderbeg called for his son. John was young. Maybe 12 years old. A boy who had grown up in the shadow of a legend. Who had never known a world without war. Skanderbeg held out a bundle of sticks. Twigs tied together with cord. Break one, he said. John pulled a single twig from the bundle. Snapped it easily. Now break the bundle. The boy tried. Strained. Couldn't do it. Skanderbeg looked at his son. At the lords standing around the room. At the men who would have to carry on without him. Remember this, he said. The Sultan will come again. He will bring the world with him. He paused. Gathered his breath. If you are one, you are ash. If you are many, you are a mountain. January 17, 1468. George Castriati, Skanderbeg, died. Not from a blade. Not from an arrow. Not in battle. From a fever. In a bed. Surrounded by men who owed him everything and could give him nothing. The wolf who had outrun the Ottoman Empire for 25 years was finally caught. Not by sultans or generals or armies. By time. The news spread across Albania like wildfire. In the mountain villages, women wailed. Men wept openly. Children who had never known another leader stared at their parents in confusion. The lords looked at each other and saw the truth in each other's eyes. The thing that held them together was gone. The League of Leja, that impossible alliance of feuding clans, began to fracture immediately. Without Skanderbeg, there was no one strong enough to keep them unified. No one respected enough. No one feared enough. The clans retreated to their valleys. Started rebuilding their old grudges. Preparing for the world that was coming. A world without the wolf. When Mem II heard the news, he didn't celebrate. According to legend, he sighed. Asia and Europe are mine at last, he reportedly said. Woe to Christendom. She has lost her sword and shield. Think about what that means. The man who conquered Constantinople. The man who had crushed every enemy in his path. The man who commanded the largest military force on earth. He was relieved. Not triumphant. Relieved. Because even Mehmed, with all his power and arrogance, had recognized the truth. Skanderbeg was the only thing standing between the Ottoman Empire and total domination of the Balkans. Now that wall was gone. It didn't happen immediately. Skanderbeg's son John tried to continue the resistance. So did some of the lords. They held out for another decade. But without the wolf, the pack scattered. Krujë fell in 1478, 10 years after Skanderbeg's death. The Ottomans rolled across Albania, fortress by fortress, valley by valley. The resistance that had lasted 25 years collapsed in less than one. Albania would remain under Ottoman rule for the next 4 centuries. Everything Skanderbeg had fought for was gone. Or was it? Years later, the Ottomans opened Skanderbeg's tomb. They didn't do it out of hatred. They did it out of something stranger. Reverence. The Janissaries, the same system that had created Skanderbeg, had never forgotten him. To them he was the ultimate soldier. The perfect warrior. The man who had done the impossible. They took his bones. Not to destroy them. To wear them. They encased fragments of his ribs and skull in silver and gold. Fashioned them into amulets. Hung them around their necks. They believed that carrying a piece of the wolf would give them his baraka, his divine luck, his supernatural ability to survive. The empire that had tried to destroy him ended up worshipping his remains. That's not just respect. That's fear. The kind that outlives death. Skanderbeg lost. Let's be honest about that. Albania fell. The Ottomans won. The empire that he had fought for 25 years eventually swallowed everything he had protected. By any normal measure, his resistance was a failure. But that's not the whole story. Because Skanderbeg didn't just fight a war. He proved something. He proved that the Ottoman machine could be beaten. That a small force, fighting on its own ground with the right leader, could bleed the most powerful empire on earth. He proved that loyalty could be broken. That identity could survive erasure. That a man raised as a weapon could choose to become something else. He proved that resistance, even failed resistance, changes the equation. The memory of Skanderbeg never died. 4 centuries later, when Albania finally broke free from Ottoman rule, they raised his flag. The red field. The black double-headed eagle. It's still their flag today. His image is everywhere in Albania. Statues. Street names. The National Museum in Krujë. His face on currency. He's not just a historical figure. He's the founding myth. The proof that Albanians, scattered, feuding, outnumbered, could stand against empires. Every nation needs a story like that. A moment when the impossible happened. A person who refused to accept the inevitable. Skanderbeg is that story. Think about what he actually did. He spent 28 years learning to be an Ottoman. mastering their language, their tactics, their politics. Then he spent 25 years using all of it against them. He was a Christian hero who had been a Muslim commander, an Albanian rebel who had been an Ottoman general, a father of a nation who died with his country in flames. He lived in total contradiction, and somehow that contradiction became his greatest strength. Because he understood the empire better than it understood itself. He knew where the cracks were, how to exploit them, how to turn strength into weakness. The Ottomans created him, and he used their own training to humiliate them for a quarter century. Here's what the history books often miss. Skanderbeg didn't fight to win. He couldn't win. He knew that from the beginning. He fought to prove that fighting was possible. He fought to delay the inevitable long enough that it stopped feeling inevitable. He fought to give his people a story they could carry through 4 centuries of occupation. A story that said, "We resisted. We were not conquered easily. We bled them for every inch." That story mattered. It still matters. Every time a small group stands against a larger power, every time someone refuses to accept that resistance is useless, every time a leader chooses mercy when vengeance would be easier, they're walking in the shadow of the wolf. If this story changed how you see resistance, leadership, history itself, subscribe right now. I'm telling stories like this every week. Stories that don't just inform you. Stories that transform you. And if you made it this far, drop a comment. Tell me what part hit the hardest. Tell me what you'll remember. I'll see you in the next one. You just spent the last 30 minutes with a man who was supposed to be erased. The Ottomans took him as a child, gave him a new name, a new religion, a new identity, trained him to forget everything he was. He remembered anyway. He rode across a battlefield with a forged document and 300 men. He stole back his homeland with a lie and a sword. He united clans that had been killing each other for generations. He fought the greatest empire on earth to a standstill. For 25 years. He didn't win. Albania fell. The Ottomans ruled for centuries. But they never forgot him. They wore his bones around their necks. And neither has anyone else. Skanderbeg was the janissary who remembered his name. In a world of empires, that's the most dangerous thing a man can be.